Hello, everyone, and welcome to my lightning talk on governance and planning for resilient pastoral livelihoods. My name is Dr. Peadar Brehony, and this is based on my PhD research, which I did a couple of years ago at the University of Cambridge. I'm going on to one little section of that research, and what I want to show is the ways in which adaptive governance based on negotiation, consensus, and consent is a comfortable way to ease the tension between the good governance trilemma of participation, legitimacy, and effectiveness when managing and maintaining resilience in complex social ecological systems. So I just want to quickly go over the talk and look at the little bit on the context, the approach I took, some of my findings, some of the implications, and a caveat or two. Apologies for rushing. It's only 5 minutes, but we've had a long history. People have a long history of developing regimes and rules to protect and preserve their social ecological system in some desired state. We call that resilience. And in the case of Kenya's rangelands, chronic marginalization continues to undermine traditional institutional capacity. Yet in the area that I studied, there was a resilient system that had both traditional and non-traditional forms of governance. I won't go into my methodology too much because of the time, but the framework I used was the social ecological systems framework, which allowed me to be able to take a systems-based conceptualization where there were dynamic interactions between the social and the ecological. My research was in the South Rift of Kenya, which is southern Kajiado, central southern Kajiado, where there was a lot of variability in rainfall, classic for pastoral rangelands, where there were particularly different groups of Maasai, particularly Lodoklani Maasai and minorities from other groups, who were there to gather their livestock. Many of them practiced cultivation, and there were also plenty of wildlife, which led to the creation of two conservancies. And although the conservancies have brought in some benefits from tourism, their primary function is as a grass bank or a drought refuge. What I found was that the traditional governance systems still were present, like when they were managing grazing, but that these were waning. So, for example, in this map here, you can see that across the whole area that I was studying, each area had its own name, and these were used to communicate where grazing was permitted, where it wasn't permitted, certain livestock weren't, and this allowed where grass was present, where it wasn't present. This allowed for a very effective form of grazing management. Likewise for settlement, where people were allowed to stay, where they weren't allowed to stay, etc. At the same time, there were modern systems of governance, like the group ranch or now the community land committee. And so people participated actively in these forms of governance too. So people who were eligible to vote in the group ranch elections, you can see from this graph here, the proportion of households that were eligible to vote, that they did vote. A large percentage voted in their last elections. And this is me attending one of the elections where I saw in person large numbers of people collecting for that election. And also people felt that their households had an influence in the group decision making, the decision making of the group ranches or community land. That was another question that I asked them. And so these are two of the several spheres of governance that I found in the South Rift. And in this diagram, I've tried to capture all of those that are relevant in my case. So for instance, you have the traditional system up here, which cuts across in the top left, cuts across the national, the red, and the international, the green, Tanzania and Kenya. You then have the group ranch sphere, what happens at the group ranch or community land. You have the county sphere, the national sphere, and then you have this top-down colonial, ex-colonial system of the chiefs and sub-chiefs, all of which work together in different ways. So, for example, when I talked to different leadership, they pointed out that each form of leadership was different, or governance. The group ranch, the Laiguanan, the Nkrauni, they all are different, but each has their own worth, is what they said. So what emerges are new forms of governance, which are neither traditional or modern, nor formal or informal, but something else. They are dynamic, polycentric hybrids of the modern and traditional, the formal, the informal, where the institutions form a mosaic of interconnected arrangements which monitor each other, where no single agent possesses all the abilities to address the multifaceted and complex environment problems that we have. And in effect, this creates a balance between those who are distant from the local social ecological system, so let's say at the national scale, and they tend to be ignorant or insensitive to the local considerations, and those who are local and tend to be ignorant of linkages to larger systems or forces which impact the system, for example, the local traditional or the group ranch. And the vertical linkages allow the local to link to some extent into the regional and the national institutions. And so they haven't suddenly modernized or rejected the traditional, but they have effectively adapted and used the traditional, which is legitimate and participatory, and adapted with the modern. This has created a much more resilient system. However, a quick caveat before I finish. We must remember that it's also possible that local governance institutions can be co-opted by powerful other institutions like a central government to increase legitimacy and manage conflicts without really devolving power. And this has occurred many times in pastoral settings. There are also institutions of authority which create power imbalances. And so in my case, I found that the participation of women in leadership was continually limited. So, a very quick talk, but thank you for listening, and thank you to those who funded my field research.